years. So, where did you stay? Did you have
A nice hotel
Oh,
down
that's
in
good.
the western section.
Hi, Mike.
Oh, Trudy.
How are you?
Fine. Good to see you.
You okay, Weathersby? Mike
I think so.
McReynolds.
Hi.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Mike was a longtime manager at the National Archives. Specialty was legal records and general rights.
Okay, excellent. Well, this is a wonderful occasion. This is just such a useful publication. It's terrific. Unfortunately, there's much need for it.
Yes.
You know, you keep thinking that there's not going to be more of these. We're kind of exhausted. I mean, they keep popping up again. He's talking about another one. They've already had one. Afghanistan's talking about one.
Move people up there.
Oh, yeah. That wouldn't exactly be a truth commission, but I've noticed reports of sort of some movement happening with the Armenian genocide.
Yeah.
Yeah, even at this late date.
Thanks.
Yeah, no problem.
And there's apparently a bill pending before the U.S. Congress to sort of officially label it as genocide, and some discussion within Turkey.
I mean,
So, who knows what will come of that.
I remember when a dozen years ago I was on the U.S.-Russia Peace Commission. We were in Armenia, and the arguments that were going on between embassy staff and headquarters, State Department, over what they could and could not say.
Oh, yeah.
Couldn't use the word genocide, and
Yeah.
you couldn't attend the commemoration ceremonies because that would offend the Turks. I mean, just this ballet that the U.S. government was dancing around to
Yeah,
try.
it's really interesting. Very chatty.
Hi, how are you?
Pretty good. Will you need help with that? Would you task the intern to sit by it, or
I hope not.
did they give you a?
Yeah, they gave me a
oh,
clicker.
okay,
Gave me a clicker, and assuming it works.
yeah, no.
I guess maybe Ryan can sit in case,
Well,
or you, or whoever knows how to do that. Just in case, but I think we should be
30
okay.
RSVPs. I don't know what happened.
Don't worry about
Unless
it.
the guards decided to not let anyone in, I'm
Don't worry about it.
somewhat annoyed.
How's the Romania project?
Good, I guess. We just wonder with
We just got back from
the guys from
visiting
the
son.
WMIA office at the Pentagon, and they're getting now into the Romanian archives as well.
Made Denver his home
They use the
15 years
CAD and
ago.
stuff a little bit to open up some of the
He,
records, and we're piggybacking on that.
Runs the warehouse
Yeah.
for a chain of cars.
The problem is they have to change 15 years.
We will.
No one ever wants to make that. They have to. So there's no desire to just get
Yeah, he
them
was not a good
put them on the
student.
table. And that's where like causes problems. So whenever they have a little pressure on them, then they open up somebody. No one really wants to do it.
Hooked on the job with a flower wholesaler.
Right down here. So there's nothing, someone's so
And there was a
Some talk about the internet changing partners leadership at some point, and that didn't work out. So,
thought he'd take
I
over the
was
business,
thrilled
but some
that
point.
the archivist finally stopped wearing his police uniform.
died.
12 years ago, he'd always show up with the
because they're still under administrative terrorists.
but that's fairly common in many places.
Dad couldn't
It's
help out.
bad.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not.
They were talking actually building it down here. I still don't like that stuff. That's just so much.
What tends to happen, I think, is that they're under culture that is culture always gets the small culture
Yeah.
the government.
Yeah.
So they start to get small. I just think that midnight last night, people,
And we drove down to Santa Fe for a couple of days. I haven't seen
so
Santa
you
Fe.
say,
Yeah, really? Okay.
But
I think the idea was to sort of
Anymore with Santa Fe,
from
it's
under
goes
the
around
these
it.
mentalities.
Yes.
Part of the reason I think that they wanted to move it from one to mechanism that allows them then to go past the civil servant protection of their jobs and just
I mean, I drove to Cape Breton
hire
this summer,
other people
but that was the
that are
special
qualified.
occasion.
I think those were part of the reason why they wanted to change.
But I saw friends all over the way, so
Organization.
yeah.
So, well, I'm going back, I guess, and like, look out.
She's fine, she's
See what?
in
Hello.
her sixth year of it.
How are you, dear?
Yes,
I got back at midnight last night, yeah.
she's still with good humor. She's very
So, I mean, I'll tell you about it, it's just such a,
Yeah, I got to see her.
astonishing experience, but it's,
But Cape Breton.
you know, you always have to first. I've never done X before. This is the first time I've had a bat fly over my head while I was on the Oh, that gives you a sense of how secure the buildings are. And we've got 4 of the 5 areas I think
We have a special feeling.
I was going to say that must be there's nothing.
So, yeah.
Anyway, so my latest one is bats and rats. I didn't see a rat.
I hope not.
No, I did not see a rat, but I saw detritus that would lead me to believe that there had been said animals.
Questions every
Right.
time.
I'm glad we're just gossiping right now. No, absolutely. Please,
It's nice of them to do that.
to be a world delighted. Delighted. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
And some of us,
What is it?
Have a bit of fun.
Oh, Chris. Oh, yeah.
Oh, that must actually be 15 minutes.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
over my other sweater, but I'm dying of.
I read several. I read several.
I mean, it's cotton, obviously. Yes, not next
I am. I'm with
Oh,
National
yeah,
Defense
it has
Charter
been,
State.
it's
We're really slow right now, so they're like, hey, just blood
Well,
pressure
we're
minutes
not
go. Oh my God. So, hey, grab
That's a real Washington.
today's going to be big. They said, well, they've been pulling all day to go.
We'll see. It's
Congressional
gorgeous
breakfast
today.
this morning.
University of Maryland?
Jordan here early this morning, and I head over to the Asia Center. Already got some
16
call.
fairway, I saw from my office.
I'm watching the broadcast in there from neither. I'm sorry? Well, I have class to do, so they're like, hey, don't want to come in if you want. Don't know. I have.
Is that right?
Yeah, no clue. Like the Paul,
When it was
like
like,
Paul,
you know, what was a good time to show up.
all I knew was what was going on. Very good.
Sneak off in the office.
Anything but accounting.
Run up there.
Anything but a cat. How are you? Anything but a
Sam lives
cat.
about 5 blocks.
My sister's an accounting major, so I joke about that.
Baby sister.
Younger sister is 4 years. I'm looking at hospitals back here. I'm from Texas, 3 days a week. So I'm looking at coming back here this summer.
She's working on
historical internship at the State Department. Using, you know. That's great. You know, if they have paid suspension, they are paid. It's got to be paid. It's unpaid this one. Pennsylvania.
He's a journalist, as you know. But
Nice to see you. So glad you're doing this.
No.
Oh, yes. Good. Get everything murdered by the lottery authorities. Exactly. I have to go talk
So I
at
had a
6
date
at
to
GW, so
Don't
I'm
worry,
going to
don't
be
worry.
out here. And I'm going to leave here at
People would
5.
talk, but nobody said a word.
So I really wanted to
So it's me.
talk a little
You
saw me, the market.
but my
Sort of.
classes, history, international affairs, I do a lot on Jewish commissions and
different ways of doing it.
That's true.
That's
true.
That's why.
I was just saying,
Like a
Catherine, she
politician.
has it's one of the must reads if you're going to deal with.
She goes whether
Yes.
Danny knows or not.
Yes.
She's there
Yeah.
with him,
Yeah.
and
That's a
sometimes
great
without him.
technique. I've been thinking,
Yeah. No.
since we don't have much to do in this project, that
So, anyway.
that we should do start
Your president took your fire?
Japan for some of this issue. Because
Stuff
it's
has really dragged through the papers.
current difficulties between China and Japan are all about Japan's failure to really come to terms with its
Well,
world
you know, my colleagues at GW have this project reconciliation and that deals with all of that.
Someone told me about this,
Yes.
so I will get together with them.
Yeah.
and find out.
Well, you don't know. Just
What I-
They may not have it. You gotta understand.
What I've got going is I have a society of American archivists who can have constant access to this.
Oh, good.
And so I'm trying to get money out of the U.S. Friendship Commission.
And a few of us who gathered here will leave if they don't.
And talk about
Oh,
it.
Yeah.
Access is one thing.
You're
Dealing
not
with
hearing
what it
the
all
reason.
says is another.
Somebody
indicator.
asked early in the year when there was a picture
Gotta
of
start
Wilson.
with the access.
Shovel anywhere. When there's a photo of Woodrow
Fact, you
Wilson.
got a new
There's
law.
one right there.
Absolutely.
Okay.
War II.
If you go take a look, he's throwing out the first pitch at a ball.
Oh, is
He
he?
looks absolutely delighted.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna sit down.
Okay, take a seat. Yep. We'll get started. Would you like some water? Sure.
We better. We agree.
Sit up front.
Eric, can I join you?
How are you doing?
Absolutely.
How we doing? All my buddies from Washington.
Please do, yeah. It's a nice guy.
Excuse me.
Such a perfect, really for you to use so much to do all the experience you have here. All these years at the archives, I mean, it's wonderful to see.
Yeah, I know.
See this kind of progression.
Things will start coming out probably over the first year. I got another manuscript coming out.
Okay, we'll get started. I think there may be some more people coming in a bit late, but we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to the Wilson Center. This event is sponsored by the History and Public Policy program of the Wilson Center. You may know that better as the Cold War International History Project. That's one project under the umbrella of History and Public Policy. This event is also co-sponsored by the Jeanette Rankin Library Program of the U.S. Institute of Peace, and we're particularly grateful to Ellen Insell for her assistance. The Wilson Center is, for those of you who may not be familiar with the center, is the nation's official memorial to President Wilson. It was established by Congress as a living memorial to Woodrow Wilson, designed to bring the worlds of scholarship and policy together to create interaction between the two that would be mutually fruitful. As today's subject strikes me as a particularly direct example of the intersection between scholarship and policy. The records of truth commissions operate on several different levels, really, of this interaction. You know, on one level, it's a matter of technical matters in preserving the documents and various other things that we'll hear about. On another level, it's a legal matter. And then on yet another level, it's a political matter. And so what could in some ways be purely a kind of a technical issue really involves a much broader range of issues in the development of a particular country in the development of a region, and more broadly in the development of the whole, international community, whatever that means. It is certainly of tremendous importance to the countries that have truth commissions, how they deal with the records that emerge from those commissions. So we are very fortunate to have today, and I'm really very pleased to introduce the author of the publication that we have available for your purchase, Final Acts, a guide to preserving the records of truth commissions, written by Trudy Peterson, who is now an archival consultant, and prior to that, earlier in her career, she served in the National Archives in numerous capacities, including acting archivist of the United States. Then after she retired from service in the U.S. government, she was the founding executive director of the Open Society Archives in Budapest, which focus on the records of the Cold War period, the communist regimes of Eastern Europe. And then she became the director of the Archives and Records Management for the UN High Commissioner for Refugees. She's a past president of the International Conference of the Round Table on Archives and the Society of American Archivists. And she's lectured on archives throughout the world, as well as in recent years consulting with many countries on how to deal with the records collected by their truth commissions. Came back from Guatemala, she told me last night at midnight. So the work goes on, and I think we're really very privileged to be able to hear directly from from Trudy Peterson about this important work. Thank you.
Thank you. First of all, let me say thank you to the Wilson Center for sponsoring this work. It was essential to have the Wilson Center as a sponsor because I was dealing with 20 different countries, and I really needed a letterhead that I could use to write to their embassies and have some hope that they might respond. Just writing as a private citizen and saying, "Dear Embassy of Guatemala, please tell me what happened to the records of your Truth Commission," doesn't go very far. The Wilson Center was incredibly important to make this happen. I also want to thank them for not only working with Johns Hopkins to put out this volume, but I wanted this to be available to truth commissions around the world in countries that are impoverished and that cannot afford to buy with hard currency a copy. And Wilson Center has done the wonderful thing of putting it up on its website. And I know that's important because in May I was in East Timor. And the East Timor Truth Commission is just wrapping up its work right now, and they had gone in and downloaded it from the Wilson Center website because they didn't have the hard currency to buy it. So I thank the Wilson Center for having that kind of vision. It may not make Johns Hopkins terribly happy, but it's a true service. It's what Woodrow Wilson would have wanted us to do, I think. What I thought I'd do today is talk a little bit about how the idea for the book developed, and then I'll talk a little bit about some things I've learned that aren't in the book but sort of summarize the book. How the book began then. As Catherine said, I was sitting at my desk in Budapest one day and the phone rang, and it was Arya Nair, who was my boss at Soros Foundations in New York, who said, "Would you go to South Africa and talk with the South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission about what they should do with their records when they wrap up?" And I said, yes, of course I would. And so they put me on a plane to South Africa, and I spent a very interesting number of days in the South African Truth Commission. Came back, wrote a big report for them, and sent it to them. And they printed part of my report in their final report, which I didn't know for years afterwards. That, it was news to me when somebody finally told me, "Did you know that part of your report was printed?" But then I started being asked by people who were consulting with other truth commissions, "Could you send me your South Africa report?" And I said, "No, it's the South Africans. It's not mine. I did it for them."
And they would always say yes. And so I started to say, this is crazy. I need to write this down to help people generally think through this problem, not just do it one at a time. And that's how the idea for the book came about. The book has two parts then, and really two audiences. The first half is a series of, as Catherine has noted, legal questions, political questions, and archival questions that I suggest truth commissions need to ask themselves as they come to deciding what to do with their material. It is, and the reason it's titled Final Act, it is their final act. They decide what to do with all the stuff they've collected. And then it goes someplace, or doesn't, depending. So that's the first part. It asks a series of questions, and then I describe what other countries who've had truth commissions have done in answer to those questions. I think it's inappropriate for anyone outside a country to try to suggest an answer to the country. The country has to come to that themselves. But you can lead them through the logic by asking the questions so they can come then to a decision of what, for their country, at that time, in their situation, is appropriate. So that's the first half. The second half, which is really designed for the scholarly community, is my effort to find out what happened to the records of 20 truth commissions around the world. I limited my study to truth commissions that were set up at the top level of government, and I limited them to government truth commissions. There have been truth commissions run by, say, the Catholic Church or NGOs. I didn't deal with them. I dealt with national level governmental truth commissions. And what I've done in the second half of the book is do a little summary of what happened to the records to the best of my ability to figure it out in those 20 countries. So what I thought we'd do for the balance of this discussion is I'll show you some summaries then I did that aren't in the book, but that I have done for an article I published afterwards, looking at, indeed, why do countries decide the way they decide? Having figured out what they decided, then why did we get to this stage? So first we have to look at, and let's hope this baby works. Aha. Okay, first of all, where are they? Most people say, oh, they're all in Africa. No, the majority of them are in Latin America. By the way, you may be aware there's a truth commission running in the United States now in Greensboro, North Carolina, looking at a particular civil rights event that happened in 1979. And that's going on right now. It's the only truth commission I know of that has actually happened in the United States. But it is a local one, and it is, as you might expect, wildly controversial. But anyway, by continent then, we have in Africa, we have 6 of them, Asia 4, Europe 1, and Latin America and Caribbean, because I threw Haiti in there, 9. So that's the spread then as to where they are. Then I tried to figure out, well, who created them? And Parliament created the South Africa and the German one. The United Nations created 3, Burundi, El Salvador, and Guatemala. And either the president or prime minister set up the rest of them. By the way, the earliest of the truth commissions was in Uganda and was set up by Idi Amin. So, you know, it isn't always a swell thing that we're doing here. The Zimbabwe one was set up by Mugabe after he took over, and so forth. So these are not uniformly the liberal democratic forces that are setting these up necessarily. Status of the final report. The report was not completed in Bolivia. The report was completed but not published in Nigeria and Zimbabwe. The report was published but distribution was limited. I have a question mark after Haiti because I've never seen a copy actually. Uganda published, I believe, 200 copies. They were distributed. They went back to get, You should change your battery or switch to outlet power immediately. Okay. Oh my goodness. Hmm? Yeah. Anyway.
We have a rescue coming.
Have a rescue coming.
The cavalry.
So then Uganda decides that they're going to reprint it, and they reprint 2,000, and then somebody gets cold feet, and I'm told they're all locked up in a warehouse somewhere in Kampala. So that never really did happen. Let's see if it will go. Maybe not, huh?
We'll press OK is the first thing you have to hit return.
There we go.
There you go. Let's see if this is doing it. Okay. Then I said, well, which countries had a Freedom of Information Act, and does this matter? If a country has a Freedom of Information Act, is it more likely to put its records in a public institution that has public access to it? Now, the 3 countries, I'll just give you a little clue, the 3 countries that are in the process or have put them in a public institution with public access are South Africa, which went to the National Archives. They had a little hiccup. Some boxes originally went to the Department of Justice, but there was public outcry, and they're all now in the National Archives under public access law. Germany, which went to a special foundation archives that is under the rules of the National Archives and has access laws. And South Korea, which is very interesting because they set it up with a member of the staff from the National Archives seconded or detailed right to the staff of the commission the whole time to make sure the records were maintained. The trouble is the South African access legislation is so restrictive, I'm not sure that it's going to be made available very soon, but I'm reasonably sure it's going to be protected. It's going to be organized and going to be protected. So you start to say, okay, if you have the Freedom of Information Act, then is this going to make a difference? By the way, since I did this slide, Germany has now passed theirs. They were one of the big holdouts in the EU, and that just passed this summer, late summer. So they would now be on the list if I redid this slide. I did this slide on the 2nd of August, and since that, it has been ratified. What about a Privacy Act or a Data Protection Act? Did that make any difference? And here again, you start to see South Africa, South Korea, and Germany all looking at laws that regulate what information about human beings can be released. And so that's the way that one looks. Then I said, well, what about the Transparency International ranking of countries? Does this play into what happens? And here again, we start to see our 3 countries, Germany, South Africa, and South Korea, in the top half of Transparency International's ranking of countries where there is transparent government, where it's possible to do business and have some confidence that the laws indeed do work. And Chile is on the top of the TI list. I think this is a little unusual. By the way, this is the 2003 list because that was the most recent at the time I was writing. The list changes a little bit every year. Chile's Truth Commission has a sort of curious denouement. When they got done with the Truth Commission, they copied all of the individual case files from the Truth Commission and the final report, and they gave it to the president. And then the records of the Truth Commission went to the Ministry of Justice for prosecution. The Ministry of Justice then divided the records up depending on the district in which the violation took place for prosecution purposes. So as far as I know, they are now no longer a single body of records. The president, meanwhile, is sitting with the case files plus the final report. So Chile decides it wants to nominate its human rights records for the memory of the world status and get some protection over them. They didn't have a single body of records anymore. The president had taken his records and his copy of the final report to his university when he left office. Does this kind of sound familiar, those of you who know the presidential records issues in the United States? So he took it into private hands when he left. So what Chile eventually did was they scanned the president's set of copies of the case files and the final report and put those scanned items on CD-ROMs and deposited the CD-ROMs in the National Archives, and that's what the Chilean National Archives now has of the body of Truth Commission records. So it went out of government custody, got copied, and came back. Meanwhile, the originals are still in the Department of Justice and are scattered. Germany was parliamentary. When it was completed, the parliament set up a foundation to handle the records, but the foundation was specifically under the parliament, and the parliament's records are specifically under the National Archives Act in Germany, and so the records come under that. Uruguay. Uruguay has just had, as you probably know, a change of government. It's a much more left-liberal government. The best archivist I know in Uruguay is the new National Archivist of Uruguay. I have lots of hopes for them, and I am sure they will get the records into their hands. Up until that point, the successor to the Truth Commission had been hanging on to them. I've mentioned South Africa and South Korea. Peru, again, a very interesting story. They had a conflict of law. They had a law for the Truth Commission that said the records would go to the Ombudsman, and they had a government records law that said it would go to the National Archives. And when they had to resolve the question between the two, they said the Ombudsman law was second, or the more recent one, therefore it controlled, therefore the records would go to the Ombudsman. However, the Ombudsman had neither facilities, nor staff, nor experience to handle any of the records. So they went to various donor governments to set up a secondary archives to handle the records. Sri Lanka, have no idea really, truly, what status the records are in. El Salvador. I'm going to talk about El Salvador and Guatemala together because they're sad stories. Both of those were commissions that were set up by the United Nations in cooperation with the peace accords that ended the civil wars in both countries. At the conclusion in both cases, there were proposals to have foundations in the country set up to handle the records. The political parties in the country, the various, I don't mean the parties per se, but the parties that had a political stake in it could not agree. Both records were sent to the United Nations, and they are locked up indefinitely. One is locked up specifically until 2050, except with the personal permission of the Secretary General. The other is locked up indefinitely. Having just come back from Guatemala, the human rights activists in Guatemala are not terribly happy about this situation. Argentina. Argentina, it's in the hands of the Ombudsman, who is under the Ministry of Justice. Again, it's not in the National Archives. Argentina is in the process of setting up a national memorial museum to the bad years. They are going to set up the museum in a former Navy facility, which also served as a torture center. They're debating whether they're going to put the records there. This is another factor that I see around the world, is there is a real split. Some countries use a building and say that by putting a Truth Commission in there or a Human Rights Ombudsman there, they cleanse the building. They change it from being a place of repression to a place of openness. I've also talked to people who say, I could never step through the doorway of that building again. I don't care what's in it. I couldn't go in. So there's a real question as to whether that's a good idea. And the last I knew from the Argentines, they hadn't absolutely decided whether they were going to put the records in that building or not. Zimbabwe. Well, as I said, the report never came out. The report went to the president. The records went to the president. It is believed that in among the boxes from the President's office that are stored in the Government Record Center are the records of the Commission. I've talked to the National Archivist of Zimbabwe, who is a pretty brave guy. He was willing to tell me that there were boxes in there. He believed they had the records. He had no authority to open them. But what also happened was there were stories in the press saying that the record center, the Government Record Center, had been entered by unknown persons and certain records removed. The National Archivist was then forced to make a statement as to whether this was true, and he said, in a very careful statement, he had no knowledge of such loss. So we really honestly don't know where all the Zimbabwe records are, to be perfectly blunt. Philippines is one of my favorite stories. It went to another human rights ombudsman that was set up, and they were divided up then in various locations in the country, much like the Chilean situation. So when I wrote to the human rights ombudsman and said, well, did you have any losses when you broke the records up? And she said, well, yes. I mean, some got lost in transit, and then some of them were eaten by termites, which gives you a sense of what happens if you don't have good protection in climates that are tropical. Guatemala we've talked about. Bolivia, it's the only country where no one would talk to me on the record. People would talk to me but would say, you may not cite me by name, which ought to give us all a sense of how tough this was in Bolivia. The belief is that it is probably in the hands of the president, but again, nobody really knows. Haiti, it was in the Department of Justice. Some part of it was probably in the Ministry of Interior. I talked to a U.S. lawyer who had actually used some of the records in the Ministry of Justice. However, if you've been following the political events in Haiti in the past 8 months, the likelihood that these things are still intact in either ministry, I think, is pretty low. Uganda, said to be in the Government Record Center, the archives there. Technically it exists. It's pretty much moribund. You can't get at them. I was told by the fellow who runs the record center that you would have to ask the president directly if you could find out where they were. Nigeria, I have no idea. Nobody would answer me. Burundi, it's my big success. This is another UN-established commission. And I asked the UN archives in New York. No, they didn't know where it was. No, they didn't have it. And so I was chalking it up as another one of these losses. And it was big. I knew it was big because in the report they say they did 6,000 oral interviews and taped them. They transcribed 4,000. I mean, this is not a small body of stuff. This is significant. So, and I knew they brought them back to New York because they had started doing them in Burundi, and for reasons of convenience and also for reasons of just safety, they eventually brought them back to New York and did about the second half of the transcripts there. So they had to have been somewhere. So I'd given up. And the UN asked me to come and do a small project in the UN archives, well, for the UN archives, not in the archives, but in one of the departments in New York. And it's one of the kinds of projects where they say, we don't know what's in this room, but here, take your pad and paper and go in and take a look around and knock on the door when you want to come out for a glass of water. So I'm sitting all alone in this storage room, taking notes as to what I'm seeing and sort of looking at stuff. And all of a sudden, I notice that I've got a file cabinet that says Burundi Commission. And later, in the same job, I find another one. So we got it all moved into the UN archives. I don't think we got them all, but I at least have found a couple of big chunks of the Burundi Commission records, not by any plan, not because anyone was controlling these records, mind you, but we did find it. Chad, these are actually probably still pretty well controlled because they continue to believe that they can prosecute their former dictator, Habre, in Belgium. And so the Ministry of Justice is said to still be controlling them. Nepal, again, nobody will nobody knows. And of course, the political situation in Nepal right now, you wouldn't expect to be able to get any kind of answer on it. So that's what it looked like. And you can see the higher up you go on a transparency scale, the better shot you have of knowing where they are and having them in some sort of control that allows research access to them, as well as access for the purposes of prosecution. So this is the way it looks then. This is what I just talked about. Ministry of Justice, Interior, Ombudsman, successor bodies, National Archives, President Cabinet, United Nations, and those just plain unknowns. What I have done since this then is, and my husband told me I had to mention this, many of the countries now are running both truth commissions and courts at the same time. So what I am doing now as a follow-up is I was asked by the United States Institute of Peace if I'd be interested in looking at what has happened or should happen to the records of the temporary international criminal courts and tribunals. So this is now the next piece I will be looking at, I am looking at currently, the International Courts for Yugoslavia, Rwanda, Sierra Leone, which was running with a Truth Commission at the same time, East Timor, which is a Truth Commission and an internationalized national court, and Kosovo. And so that is the follow-on now of the Truth Commission piece, and I have some hopes that we're going to be able to preserve some of those records such that scholars will be able to use them. The final thing I was going to say was then Transparency International, who has my heart, I think, for the rest of my life. In this same list where they ranked the countries in 2003, they looked at the question of freedom of information, and that was one of the things that made the 2003 list so important for me, because I was really looking at how do you get access to government information. And they commissioned somebody to look at the question of country transparency and records law. And this is what they wrote. Given the systems the chief archivist manages and the records he or she holds provide the paper trails crucial for exposing mismanagement and corruption, we must ask why these posts are so junior and under-resourced. Let us ask why the post of chief archivist is not accorded constitutional protection, and why it is not placed on a par with a Supreme Court judge or a Supreme Audit institution, so vital is its role in guaranteeing both accountability and public access. And I agree. That's right. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I hope that you will pick up copies of the book. It's in a very fine format, and it's available for sale outside. Some of you may have copies of it already. So there are issues in the book that haven't been talked about that you're welcome to ask about, or anything that Trudy mentioned in her presentation. I know many of you come from various different focuses and different backgrounds, so I anticipate a broad range of issues to address. So jump right in. Yes.
Pat Harrihan. Trudy, I compliment you on this. Particularly Chapter 3. I thought that was wonderful. Really, really incisive. Is it one of your recommendations to take advantage of technology? So much can be preserved on a CD or DVD today. Reading through it, it seemed to me that might help you on the security part too. Is that if you could have copies, or if they, not you, but they could do copies, that it might help with your security as well as your dissemination issues.
It certainly would help for security.
Yeah.
The cost is a very important factor. Many of these commissions are given absolutely inadequate time periods. Many of them are given like 9 months, and then they argue to get another year or so. And so they're under a huge amount of pressure to get the thing out, and they're under-resourced, typically. They collect every physical type you can imagine. Now, it depends on the kind of commission. Guatemala was asked not to look at individual cases. They were asked to look at pattern. On the other hand, other countries look at individual cases or simply look at specific cases. You know, here are the 11 cases that are most important we want you to look at. But in the course of that, they get videotapes, they get audio tapes, they get photographs, they get objects, you know, everything from ligatures and manacles to hoods to whatever you want. Some of the records aren't too large, some of them are very large indeed. It would be security to have a duplicate somewhere. Now, let me tell you the one case I know where that question came up. I personally would favor the United Nations providing storage for security copy. Peru asked the United Nations if they could get a security copy made of the critical, what they considered the critical part of their documentation. Would the United Nations take custody of that copy? And I am told the UN said no, that since they had had nothing to do with setting up the Truth Commission, it wasn't part of their mandate. I think that's wrong, and I think that we who are worried about this kind of thing need to make sure that there is a great safety box in the sky for these places and to be able to get critical copies out. I don't think it's reasonable to think we can copy all of it, but I think we could identify key parts of it and get copies out. But then I think it shouldn't just go into University X or Government Y. I think it has to go into a multinational setting that everybody is comfortable with. Having said that, I also believe, and I would like to see the professional associations, especially Latin America, American Historical Association, put through resolutions and pressure the UN to make better arrangements with Guatemala and El Salvador. I think it's untenable that people from those countries cannot see the records of those commissions. That just doesn't make sense to me. And I'm fearful that unless we do that, we will start to see this happen in other cases. And that just wouldn't be, in my view, appropriate. And I've already heard UN lawyers talk about, well, we take in the records of the Special Court for Sierra Leone under the same kind of arrangement we took, say, the Guatemala Commission. Well, that scares me. That really locks it up then. And so I agree with you, Pat. I think that technology helps us. I don't think it's the cure-all, but then we have to have somebody who's going to manage that technology, preserve that technology. You can't lock it in a box and lock it away and hope it's going to be there in 50 years. And that's a real problem, yeah.
Thank you. Anna?
From what you could see,
pardon.
I can be heard.
From what you could see, and I recognize that you were not looking inside every folder box, but from what you could see, were the truth commissions always legitimate truth commissions, or were they? Are there some that were whitewashes? Are there some that were neither here nor there, like the Warren Commission, which also, by the way, didn't let anybody see their records? Were they? Could you tell from the way the records were kept? It's impossible until you go through all of them, I guess.
I can't tell. From what I know, the El Salvador, Guatemala ones were absolutely honest. Now, those were set up, I'm focusing on them because they are such a problem. They were set up in the peace accords at the end of the Civil War with the UN participation. And in one case, the UN ultimately named all 3 members who were commissioners. In the other case, the UN named the chief, who then named himself the other 2 members with the agreement of the governments. But the 2 sides of the conflict, however you want to characterize them, could not bring themselves to agree. And because of that, you had very distinguished and very neutral people, and I have some confidence that those are truly okay. Now, if you're going to ask me about Nepal, I'm going to tell you I haven't a clue.
Forget it.
Not a clue.
But would you say that if the UN started these truth commissions, the likelihood that they're more honest is better?
I think so. Honestly, I do. But I also have great admiration for what I believe the South Africans have done, for what the Germans did, for what the South Koreans are doing. They are really trying very hard. I think the Peruvian one, from what I know, did a very good job. The problem also is that people's expectations are so high. The Peruvian one came out, and immediately what you started to see in the press was comments from people saying, I don't care what the pattern was. I want to know what happened to my brother. I want to know what happened to my son. And so all the patterning in the world doesn't help if what people really want to know is what I call the fate determination question. But yeah, I think if a country can agree enough to set it up after a major shift in government, and these happen, frankly, at the time of a major shift in government. They don't happen otherwise. And if they can agree, then among the parties to the change, you might have a better chance. But I wouldn't swear to that.
Yes, right here. Oh, wait for both mics.
Mary Mullen. I wanted to know, within the Truth Commissions, do you know if anyone was actually was prosecuted, or is it?
Yeah. Truth commissions are set up in several different ways. As I said, some of them want names named and some of them want patterns. Some of them specifically say we will not prosecute, and others can lead to prosecution. And each country seems to set it up based on its own sense of what it wants to do. And there are big arguments in the group of people who look at truth commissions whether you get a better result if you can promise amnesty for truth, which is the South African model, and then the South Africans could also say, no, you aren't coming clean, and we're going to pass you over to prosecution. Or whether you get a better result if you say, if you tell us, then we're not going to prosecute. Now, let me give you the one that's going on right now. There's two of them that are very interesting. As I said, I was in East Timor in May, and they had been running prosecutions on the one hand and the Truth Commission on the other. The problem with the prosecutions were that most people they wanted to get were actually in Indonesia and were not in Timor. It was a minority of people they wanted to prosecute that were in Timor and were actually reachable by the special prosecutor. What has happened since then is the UN has closed down its special prosecutor. They have closed down the special panels of the courts in Timor. And the Truth Commission report hasn't come out yet. And the government of Timor and the government of Indonesia have agreed to create a joint Truth Commission. And the agreement between the two is each can see the records the other holds about anything that relates to the Truth Commission, which means that the Indonesians will be able to see everything the Timorese have collected about perpetrators who are sitting in Indonesia right now. That has got a lot of people in Timor very unhappy. The government thinks it is the price they have to pay to get along with their bigger neighbor. A special commission of experts that Kofi Annan appointed recommended strongly against this, recommended that another 6 months be given for prosecutions, and if that wasn't going to work within Indonesia, that then an international tribunal, one of these temporary international tribunals I'm looking at right now, be set up in Timor. The government, as of last week, was still absolutely adamant that they did not want to do that, and that they were going to reject the UN Commission of Experts report, and they are basically going to have this truth commission with no prosecution whatever, and put paid to the whole thing, and the perpetrators will be alive and well, I believe, firmly, and living in Indonesia. That's one. Sierra Leone has the special court and the Truth Commission running simultaneously. The Truth Commission report has now come out, and I have heard two absolutely polar opinions. I know a woman who has spent most of her career studying Sierra Leone, and she thinks the worst thing on earth was to run the two at the same time, because she thinks the likelihood of prosecution stifled reincorporation within traditional communities. And she thought if you didn't have prosecution, you could bring people back, you could have them go through a tribally mandated process, whatever the particular group wanted to do, and either reincorporate the perpetrator in the community or tell them they had to go away. Other people think that that absolutely wouldn't have worked, and that the only way that reconciliation happens is if there is some lasting justice mechanism, that people just don't get a by sitting down and telling the truth. And certainly the Timorese people, not the government, but the Timorese people, that's what they're saying right now. We want to see the Indonesians prosecuted. We don't want just these handshakes. So that was a really long answer to a...
And I wanted to go out Guatemala and El Salvador because they couldn't be prosecuted, right? Because they're locked up.
No. Guatemala and El Salvador. Wow. I've just been, as you know, in Guatemala, and I've been in the Ombudsman's office. And this is so tricky, I just don't even want to comment on it right now. Both countries set up ombudsmen. There's a really fine article that was produced a couple years ago in the Journal of Latin American Studies, which compared the two countries, the two ombudsmen, how they had worked out in the aftermath of the peace accords, and whether there was really a difference in reconciliation in the country based on the way the ombuds would work. And that's better expertise than I have, honestly. I just don't know.
Yes, back here.
John Powers from National Archives. Question for you. Did you make any, this is more of an archival question, did you notice any difference in how the commissions were set up, their purpose and their missions, and if so, did it affect the ultimate disposition and how they'll be archivally processed in the future?
Sure. That's one of the things I looked at. Certainly if they're set up by Parliament, that's the best shot at preservation. Germany and South Africa, the two that preserve the records and make them available, are parliamentary commissions. That's by far the best. Preservation, if they're set up by the UN, yes, but access, no. So everything I've been able to determine is, well, here's the bottom line as far as I'm concerned. The biggest determinant of whether the records are going to be preserved and accessible is how secure the population is that we're never going back to the bad old days. The South Africans truly believe apartheid will never come back. The Germans know the Stasi is gone, and the South Koreans believe the military aren't coming back. And that gives them the freedom to think through what records are being created, to preserve the records, and to begin to think through the making available questions. if you have a situation that is as dicey as, say, East Timor, that is as dicey as Zimbabwe, you're just not going to have that happen. So when I looked at everything, it is democracy that pushes you that way, but it's the security of the change, I think, that is the fundamental thing. And the security of the change is then, I believe, reflected in a parliamentary decision that on behalf of all the people we can do this. That would be my take.
Very interesting. Trudy, I find it really fascinating that that the concept of truth commissions has spread so widely, that the practice. I wonder what your thoughts are about that. I mean, many ways one can look at it. It's just something out there that people can then seize upon for one reason or another. But is there also, do you think, a kind of growing sense of a kind of norm, an international norm or where is this coming from?
I've thought about that a lot, and when you look at which countries have done this, I mean, the first thing you notice is the old Soviet Union's missing, as you quickly would have noticed. What does that tell us? Surely, you could have a truth commission in, say, Ukraine. There would be very interesting stuff you could discuss in the Ukraine. But it hadn't happened, so why not? And why did this phenomenon grow up in the past 25 years? I mean, for all practical purposes, that's what it is. Does the end of the Cold War have anything to do with this? It starts a little before the end of the Cold War, but is this something that we couldn't have explored during the Cold War? Did countries not feel free enough to be able to do that? We know that the wars in Central America were, in a sense, surrogate Cold War wars. We were running a civil war, if you will, in Guatemala and El Salvador and Nicaragua and so on as surrogate wars. Could we have done truth commissions during a Cold War? I don't think so. So I suspect there are a variety of factors. The really interesting question to me is, I keep thinking that this was the flavor of the month and it's going to go away. And that we're not going to see these again. I also thought that with an international criminal court set up, even with the United States not in it and all those things, that we were going to see the end of the temporary tribunals. No. They were talking about a temporary tribunal and a truth commission in Burundi. This would be the second Burundi Truth Commission, notice. Some countries have had 2, some countries have had 3, by the by. Afghanistan is talking about a temporary tribunal. It may be talking about a truth commission. There's another one floating around right now. So, Cambodia, the temporary tribunal is almost set up. Yep, there's another one. I think there's another one in Africa somewhere being discussed. I can't remember right at the moment. So you say, why? If we've got these international criminal courts and these evolving institutions, why are we looking at temporary and local solutions? And why are we looking at them in geographic states, which we know in many cases are the result of colonial boundary drawing and have very little to do with the way people live with each other? Beats me, but it's a great dissertation topic for somebody. Not me.
Thank you. Yes.
Trudy, I have a follow-on question then. Hi.
Oh, please identify yourself.
Oh, my name is Ina Novoselskas. I work at the Holocaust Museum. To the Soviet Union, what is your thinking as why there isn't one, or why there aren't several? How would you explain it? And then in a totally different geographical area, I came in late. I don't know if you touched on Rwanda at all. So if you hadn't, I'd appreciate hearing about it a bit. Thank you.
I've never been able to figure out why countries like Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia couldn't have done a truth commission had they wanted to. I think they believed that the change was complete and they were going back to a more democratic system. I can rather understand why that would be very, very, very tough in the stands in Armenia or Azerbaijan or Georgia. I mean, those would be tough, tough places to do it, because the changed government was not, I think, secure enough to be able to adopt that policy. In Russia itself, I mean, I'm sitting with Russia experts. I can't, I would just simply say, again, I don't think the change was big enough and secure enough that people were willing to look hard at what happened in the way a truth commission simply rips open, if it's any good, the bad years. I mean, these are, if you've never read a truth commission report, let me just tell you, they're difficult. It's the kind of thing that you read a chapter or two and you got to take a walk, because it's really that grim. I don't know, but I think it is the secureness of the change and the secureness in the populace that it is not going to be reversed, and they are not going to be punished for having revealed what they knew. Maybe you would know better than I, but maybe the Baltics felt that they had other ways to address it. I don't know. But, yeah, it's really an unresolved question, isn't it? Rwanda. No, I really don't know. I don't know. They're doing these local courts, and I always mispronounce it, so let me try it. Gacaca. Gachacha? I never. Sounds like a dance, I'm afraid. And so people argue that in many ways that gets out into the community the same kind of information a truth commission would get out. The other thing that has happened is the big tribunals, ICTY less well, in my judgment, Rwanda pretty well, and Sierra Leone pretty well, have put in very large community outreach programs. There are millions of dollars that go into radio programs, community meetings, posters, trying to use that vehicle to get information back to the populace. There are legal scholars who say this is a terrible idea, that trials aren't set up to do that. You may know that one of the U.S. prosecutors at the end of the Nuremberg trials, the IMT, said this was the greatest history lesson the world has ever had. Well, it isn't. It is partial. It is shaped by the rules of evidence. It is shaped by the desire to convict. It is shaped by what a prosecutor chooses or does not choose to bring into evidence. So I think Rwanda has invested itself in the tribunal. By the way, that's a little off. This is the next study, but it's very interesting. The ICTY was imposed on the Balkans. ICTR, the country asked for it to be established. I'm not sure they were happy after it got established, but they actually asked for it, and I have the document. And in Sierra Leone, again, the government asked to go into an agreement with the UN and have a joint body. And so you have them operating slightly different. But because the government asked that the tribunal be established, I think they've thought that plus the local truth-telling sessions gets them the same result. I'm not sure it does.
Okay, thank you very much. It seems to me, if I can just throw in an observation about Russia, I thought about this a lot in Russia in the 90s. It seems to me a big part of the situation there was just simple exhaustion on the part of the people, combined with the diffuse nature of, of who was to blame, who would be held responsible. It was just too kind of all of us for such a long period of time, and there wasn't a clear delineation of a particular group of people responsible for a particular set of events over, it was just much more diffuse than that, and people were also just utterly exhausted.
That's an interesting point, Catherine. It may be a size factor. It may be that if you get a country that is much bigger than Peru, South Africa, Chile, it becomes much too hard to do it at a national level. I think if you tried to do it here on U.S. race relations, I've thought a lot about, could we do one on the Vietnam War here? Can you imagine us trying to do that? That would be a very difficult thing to do in this society.
Yeah.
But it may be actually a size question, and I hadn't really thought that through. But I can't imagine China trying it either, for example.
Okay. Much to think about. Thank you very much for putting all of this together in this wonderful book, and
Thank you.
For being here. Thank you all too for coming. We have some refreshments outside, so please stay and enjoy the refreshments.
Well, I was here the other day and I saw you far away, and then I then got involved in something. So I put my batteries down to why you see her something. That's the way it comes, because I showed you
And it is it.
Oh, yeah?
It's not, it's
It's
powder. It's a pure 1% net.
Have you used it?
Yeah.
Did you like it? Okay. I thought it was gonna be late because I think even then I can make the almond thing. I want to put the shafts on it. You know, it wouldn't squirt. And I don't like that big stuff. And even the squirt stuff I don't like. So anyhow, thank you. Question. What's the trial? What's the problem in South Carolina, North Carolina? You mentioned it, we were having. I don't know. I'm sorry. I thought you said that there was one coming up.
That's true. Some event, I guess.
The most characteristic thing of that country is jealousy.
Why is that not a surprise?
But Jakob had been in the limelight for so long.
Yeah. Rivalry.
Yeah, so he knows his time on that is past. And his draft never got out of someone desperate. This drafting session is going to happen on October 1st, November. Going to have representatives of all 8 parliamentary parties.
Any of the people that we worked with earlier?
Yeah, a lot. Luckily, one guy, Mirsad, who's just put in a proposal, and I've talked to Judy, I hope they're going to help him. He has been doing the most incredible work. I don't know if you ever met Pat Ball. He's the archivist and statistician for so many of his commissions. He has seen what Mirsad has done just amazing. He said, this is the database. And they attack, everyone there attacks the really great. They can't attack the facts. And one of the things he has proven is Harris Elijah was so full of crap. In 1992, he said 200,000 people had been killed. Finally, in 1994, the journalist said, well, you're still saying 200,000. He said, oh, 250,000. Mirsad is now able to prove that, including soldiers, not just innocents killed, about 90,000. Now that's bad enough.
Yeah.
Bad enough that, and you put in a face on everybody. There's already a great foundation. And Mirsad's boss became Muslim.
question. This year,
Because one of the things he
my name is Amin. Ben Amin, if you do.
Let me turn this over.
I'm the one who asked you question about the meeting. Did they call it that? Yeah. I was just asking that, do you ever think that there will be not only inquiry, at least a write-up on what happened in El Salvador and Guatemala?
Oh, it's been written. The reports are written. They're published. You can read those. You think that